Everyday injustice. Too many wrongful convictions. Corruption has infected the criminal justice system, leaving too many people helpless, fighting for their lives. Instead of receiving justice, people suffer. Is that why they say justice is blind?
Today on Everyday Injustice, we are going to be talking about closure of women's prisons, and we have Renae Badruzzaman and Katie Dixon. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having
Thank
us.
you. Yeah, thank you.
So there's a campaign to close California's women prisons. I know in past episodes, we've talked about some of the horrors that have been happening at Dublin and some of the other facilities. So can you give us kind of an introduction as to the campaign to close the women's prisons and why that's occurring now?
Yeah. Um Again, thanks you so much for having us on and covering this very important topic. And we really appreciate the Vanguard and your team for, highlighting and giving us a platform to elevate the issues. The campaign to close prisons was born about 2 or 3 years ago, you know, out of really a grave concern for, some of the atrocities that women are facing in prison right now. And then another main component that we were to identify early on was while women's prisons is the fastest growing population in the US, here in California, our women prison population has actually been trending down. The campaign really was born about 3 years ago for various different reasons. Obviously there's a grave concern for what's happening inside women's prisons right now. Some of this stuff is more prevalent these days. It's all over the news. There's allegations of sexual abuse. Folks are being dying from heat stroke and all kind of stuff. And so another thing we realized about 3 years ago, while women's incarceration is the fastest, women are the fastest growing incarceration population in this country. However, here in California, our women's incarceration rate has been trending downward. 10 years ago, we had just under 13,000 women incarcerated across three facilities. And here we are at the end of 2024 with just under 4,000 women across two facilities. And so we absolutely identified that. And that's why we do believe that closure is possible. That is the slogan to our campaign: close women prisons, closure is possible, because we feel like California can be a leader in this space. Let's finish the job. Let's bring this small, tiny population of mothers, culture keepers, women. Let's bring these people home. Let's reimagine what we're doing when we are addressing transgressions that occur in a community, and let's reimagine how we take care of women and girls moving forward. I'll say that's how the campaign really came about. Renae, did you want to add anything?
That was great, Katie. Thank you. I can share how our organization got involved if that's helpful. My name is Renae Badruzzaman. I use she, her pronouns. I work at Human Impact Partners, which is a national nonprofit whose mission is to transform public health to center equity and build collective power of social justice movements. And one of the strategies we use for that is to conduct campaign-based policy-oriented research to improve the material conditions of people's lives. And we partnered with KD and CCWP and others because they identified the need, right, and the possibility and the potential to close women's prisons. So that's a little bit of like how we got involved, and I'm happy to share more about like what our research report was and what we found a little bit later on.
Yeah, so let's start with this, because I'm slowly being converted toward abolition on prisons in general, for a lot of reasons. But I do think it's a long-term goal rather than something we can do tomorrow. But if we're going to close prisons tomorrow, what are we replacing them with?
All right. That is going to always be what the infamous question that the public wants to know.
Right.
It's a fair question, because people are rightfully concerned, when we're talking about public safety and what really public safety is. And so, what we imagine is us really coming together to really design and reimagine how we respond when someone does commit harm in a community. And so, what we're really trying to build a campaign on is really, yes, educating the public on who's in prison, who are these people, who pose a public safety threat to the community. And when you start to look at it from like that narrative and that framework and start from a humanizing structure, I think that makes that question a bit more palatable to try to answer to, our neighbors here in the public. These are mothers. There's scores of women that can come home today and go live with their families. They can go be the mother that they've been missing out on. They, if you're not too old to work, you can get out here and rebuild your life, earn a career, and get back into society, contributing to society, contributing to your children's lives, and contributing to public safety. We have grandmothers. Folks have been sitting in CIW for 30 years. People are on walkers, people need respirators to breathe, and now folks are just languishing and waiting on death. These are elders in our community. These folks can come home to skilled nursing facilities, skilled nursing homes, and still be able to live a productive life, and be contributing to society. There is all sorts of different pathways and things that we could start to really talk about when we really start from a humanizing perspective. And so to help answer people's question, well, where's there which gonna release all these criminals? Let's not start there because that's dehumanizing. Everybody is not a criminal. Let's take a look at the whole person, and then that's how we can start to really have a viable answer to, well, where will people go?
And let me ask you this, because I think this is so important for people to understand. And this is especially true with women, but it's also true with men. And people treat there as though, as I torture language, there's a dichotomy between quote unquote victim. I don't love that term, but and quote unquote offender. And the reality is that if you look especially at women, somewhere like 90% of women that are incarcerated have past trauma. They've been a victim of a crime. And so they go from being a victim of a crime and they don't have their needs met and they don't deal with that trauma. And then that carries on to them ending up incarcerated. And we see this with men too. And I think that's important for people to understand that a lot of men are victimized as young people, and they're victims of circumstance as well. And then they end up going on to being incarcerated. And so there's a cycle here that we're just not addressing.
Absolutely, David. And that is something that CCWP we're absolutely in the foreground working on that. Right now, I think what we've been trying to highlight is the best way to kind of really make that more palatable because we are familiar with hurt people hurt people. That's a common term, which is stands true. I like to use the example right now, the intimate partner violence pipeline to prison. Um, a general example would be you have a mother who is in a domestic violence relationship, and this has been going on for years. It's documented. This person is trying to get away while jumping in your car, throwing your belongings in your car with your children, and fleeing the scene. You accidentally hit somebody and they died. Now I got to go to jail, for vehicular manslaughter. But what happened? And how did that accident come to occur? Because I'm fighting a domestic violence relationship. I've been asking for help. The state isn't providing me the resources. I had the restraining order. It's not working. I'm fleeing for my life in a fit of panic and accidentally hit a person. Now all we see is Miss Dixon hit a person. And so how to unpack some of these things and what led up to that. These are stories that really don't get told, and we will get stuck on what that crime, that offender. You're an offender. This person that got killed, the victim, because their family's hurt now, and we never make that opportunity for people who have been harmed to really be in this position to understand what really happened. And so I think what you said is absolutely true. About 80% of women in prison have experienced some sort of either sexual abuse, childhood abuse, some sort of forms of violence against them. And we also see imprisonment of women as a form of violence against women. It's state violence. We feel like state violence exacerbates, perpetuates, and underlines any other sort of violence. When we're talking about control, lack of finances, um, people, the trauma that folks are living with when you in prison, those are the same conditions you was living with before prison. Now you're back in prison. Now you in prison, and you're really just still in the same cycle. I think those are really important points to make.
So Renae, you'd started to mention the report that came out. I guess it was last year, 2023, Crisis to Care. Can you tell us a little bit about that report, how it came about, and what it found?
Sure, thank you. Well, I first want to start by saying that in all of our research, we are very intentional about centering and uplifting the voices and experiences of people who are directly impacted by the issues we're talking about. So in this case was women's prisons. As Katie mentioned, according to our incarcerated folks' experience and the research, incarceration remains a serious and entrenched public health crisis. And in fact, the American Public Health Association released a policy statement that codified the harms of carceral systems and prisons and jails. And so with that intention and centering, we collaborated with the California Coalition of Women's Prisoners, CCWP, Transgender, Gender Variant, and Intersex Justice Project, and the Californians United for Responsible Budget, without which the partnership, we would not be able to do any research. We sent a bunch of surveys into the California women's prisons to reach as many people as we could. And we also interviewed people who are currently informally incarcerated in women's prisons. We did about 6 interviews and got 120 survey responses back, and then paired that with some existing public health literature. And the report really shines a light on what Katie was talking about, which is this gender identity-based discrimination and violence, as well as the criminalization of trauma and gender identity. As you both mentioned, right, like the disproportionate rates of trauma from folks before even becoming incarcerated is part of this this cycle, in a way that folks are being criminalized for it. And because of just a note on that, because of our lack of sustained community investment in the community-based services